Like it's involved. That's where. Hello,
Hey,
everybody, and
everybody.
welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict Show. So excited to be with you. Today, we're going to be talking about a very contentious topic. It's very sensitive, it's very controversial, you can use the terms whatever you may think of. Also, there is a lot of censorship regarding this topic, believe it or not. So it's surprising, it's shocking. It is what it is. So we're gonna just provide the arguments. We're gonna provide the key talking points about it. Of course, you reach your own conclusion, and we don't favor one side over another, like we've always done with any other topic. So you guys can check out the videos we've done. We try to always have an objective analysis in dealing with these very, very complicated issues. The reason also we want to do this, I'm very familiar with this topic. Not only I wrote books and articles about it, but I spent a lot of years in the Middle East. I speak the language, I understand the culture. I'm a very, very familiar with it. So, and this is what we're gonna be addressing today. So let's have the conversation.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, absolutely starting out, this is an extremely delicate, this is an extremely delicate situation because, there are issues and arguments on both sides. But like any major conflict, the people who are suffering the most is the everyday person, right? So this is civilians, this is women and children and men who really don't have anything to do with this conflict, and those are the ones, like always, that are the ones that are dying, the ones that are suffering. And so my humble request to everyone sort of watching this right now, especially in the comments, is to understand that humanity, we are one, and that it is very important to understand in any conflict, humans must be put first, and people are not their governments.
And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to address this from that concept of, even though it doesn't exist regarding this issue, like live and let live, but that was the whole objective of shedding light on a topic that is so complicated. A lot of people in the West mainly do not understand
at all. Do not understand at all. Yeah.
And the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, it goes way back. There are those who say, well, it goes back to after World War II with the Parson and Declaration. No, it goes even beyond. It goes back to 1887, if I recall, with the establishment of the first Zionist Congress. 1897. Then you go after to 1917. And why is 1917? It's because that's when the Belford, I don't know if some of you might know a little bit about Belford Declaration. So, and I'm going to share the quote for you from that particular declaration. It says, and I quote, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. End of quote. This is the declaration, Belford Declaration of 1917, which paved the way. Of course, you have to consider some other historical aspects to this. One of them, especially at that time, during what happened back then, it was the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. Because Ottoman Empire was taking a lot. Then that's where the decision also by the Brits to carve out the Middle East. This is why the tensions in the Middle East as of today, and have persisted throughout decades, was never taken within the consideration of what the Brits did when they divided the countries.
Absolutely.
Because the Brits didn't understand at that time the cultural, the ethnic, the religious divides between. This is why when we went to Iraq, for example, in 2003, we didn't understand those dynamics. I argued, as a matter of fact, against the invasion, knowing what I know as far as the history of that part of the world. You're looking over 1,000 years.
Right.
And my advice was overlooked. It's kind of whatever. So, and where we end up. So,
well, there were other interests at play.
Yeah, of course. And this is the same thing that happens now because when you look at the the Brits rather were ruling over today's Palestine, Jordan, and it was almost the Gaza Strip. All of them, they were under. As a matter of fact, I had it somewhere where I give the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Jordan, and modern day Israel. Britain, the UK, that's what it did back then, not understanding the religious, social makeup, and this is why you're seeing the persistence.
Well, and not understanding the ramifications of basically more or less randomly breaking up parts that had been for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the biggest issues with colonialism, is that more or less it came in and said, well, okay, we don't really understand much about this, but I think we should just put this line right here.
No, we can't.
What?
Yeah. And that was exactly.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, and that's exactly what triggered all the tensions in the Middle East. That's why Middle East has always been the sort of center of gravity, if I may use the term, for both those who wants to sort of take advantage of its natural resources and the conqueror who wants to divide it for political objectives.
Right.
We fell into not a trap, because we, the one who sort of navigated the destiny of the Middle East over time, especially with the discovery of oil.
Yep.
That is why the role of the United States in the Arab-Israeli conflict was never well balanced.
Yeah.
I wrote books about, my first book I remember was about the U.S. foreign policy, in which I addressed the.
Is it this one?
I think that one. That's what I addressed. I put an entire chapter about the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Yeah, I have a quote actually from that, if you'd like me to read it.
Sure.
All right, let me keep going. Let me grab this quote.
Yeah. So that was the whole idea of it, and the reason I devoted that chapter is to put it within the historical context, so the readers, whomever get a chance to read the book, will at least understand what was going on historically before making a decision or realizing that, oh, this is what it was. And that's it. So where the problem with that is our role was never balanced.
Yeah.
This is where the problem. And now with these tensions, that the attack that took place, it just pushed the conflict to the forefront. Now the whole world is watching.
Yeah.
That is where the problem. Of course, the reaction of Israel towards that is very massive, to the point when you compare the capabilities vis-a-vis. Now,
of course,
war is never any conflict where militarized conflict. It's never a pretty outcome.
Yeah.
Because who end up being hurt the most are civilians.
Absolutely.
This is always, and that's exactly what I argued in the book about the role of the United States, why it wasn't balanced.
Yeah. So. All right. So let me read this quote. This is from David's book. And by the way, guys, do you want to take questions later?
Sure. I'll be happy, especially on this topic that I'm very familiar with.
It's really nice to see a lot of you guys. Athena Wu, I saw you in the chat. Hang Tua, I also saw you.
Well, we have a new member here.
We do.
By the name Sue Bernard. That's a new member for the channel.
Well, cool. Thank
you for becoming a member.
We oh man, this one's rough. This topic's rough.
Yeah, it is, but also it's our responsibility to address it. We can't shy away from this.
No, we cannot.
I know some people sometimes say, well, it's too controversial, I can't touch. No, because to me, that's when it matters, when you take stand.
I agree.
And again, this is not about favoring one over another or supporting one argument over another. Right. It's providing an objective assessment for you, for our viewers, to decide. We will never, I shall never personally, I shall never reach a conclusion for any of my viewers or our viewers for that matter, because they have to be, those decisions have to be independent.
Absolutely.
They reach their own. But it's our role to provide the facts, the arguments, the analysis, and that's all we can do.
And also, I think you're absolutely right to take a really good look at where this actually came from.
Yeah.
Where did this conflict come from? Because the way that it looks to more or less the Western world, who has sort of heard about it and maybe they knew a little bit about it, but they didn't really understand what was going on. This took this conflict and blasted it out into the world. And it is my personal hope that this, because it was blasted out into the world, something very different will happen here. That's my hope. I don't know.
It's very, very complicated.
It is.
Very complicated. But let's not forget the role of the media into all this.
The role of the media
wasn't playing fair.
No. And also the role of the governments. Because like I said earlier, people are not their governments. I mean, just if, there's some people who disagree with that, but look at your government. Do you agree, wherever you are in the world, do you agree with everything that your government does and everything your government says? Probably not.
No. Yeah.
Probably not. And so it's always really important to separate what's actually good for the people versus what people's governments are doing.
Indeed.
Okay, so let me read this quote. It is from David's. Is this your first
book? That's my first book, by the way, guys.
Wow.
That was research in 2012, from 2012 to 2014.
Wow.
And published in 2015. Was my first one.
Well, so let's go over your books really quickly. So there's this one. There's Beneath the Veil.
There is the volatile state of Iran in the nuclear age. There's the recent one about the dynamics of Russia's geopolitics.
We have it up. It's right there. I can see it.
And there are 3 other books I contributed to for some other scholars that I know. Those are friends of mine.
Yeah.
And then I wrote about 145 articles.
You've written a lot of articles.
Yeah, there's a lot.
They've been published a lot of places. All right. So this is a quote from this book. The Arab-Israeli conflict exemplifies what it's like not having a vision and strategy in place when it comes to U.S. foreign policy towards the region. The United States has been sending mixed messages as to where it stands, in addition to its wobbly commitments to supporting young democracies and assists if and when asked. I understand that in international affairs, context matters, and it does very much. And it is in this context that American foreign policy establishment needs to adjust its approach and rethink its strategy when dealing not only with the Arab-Israeli conflict, but also a host of other matters.
Yeah. Well, it's because, let's just, straightforward. You look at just what just happened, and what was the first reaction of the president of the United States? Allocated $4 billion in defense of Israel,
which did not need congressional approval. By the way,
doesn't. But here's the thing, why the speed of something like this? One, and second, it tells me personally, as one who worked inside Washington and I understand how those dynamics, the influence of the lobbyists, the Jewish lobby in Washington, president couldn't say no, would not say no, cannot say no, because that's how it's always been. This is why the rest of the world saw the U.S. role is uneven,
very much.
And don't get me wrong, guys, Israel has a right to exist.
Absolutely.
So is Palestinians.
Yep.
So are you, whatever part of the world.
Absolutely.
So us, we're here.
Right.
So my point, we're all humans. Everybody has a right to exist. But how you go about, if there was this massive, because it was a sort of, let's say it the way it is, it was a massive blockade. But till when, especially the children, especially the elderly, this is why I always say, those who never been in war or are right at the heart of a conflict will never understand. Images on screen, on TV screens, do not reflect the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
When you start smelling the scent of dead bodies, when you start to see that bodies burnt and so forth, no matter how tough you might think you are, it will break you down.
Yeah.
And this is where the issue of, like you said earlier, could this push now for the whole world to say, well, maybe enough is enough?
Yeah.
Because this has been dragged for decades and decades and decades.
Absolutely. Well, and it's an interesting phenomena, to the internet's credit, there's a phenomena where when you shine a light on something, all of a sudden everything that's been hidden becomes clear.
Yeah.
And so now
Yeah.
everyone is seeing more or less both sides of what's happening here.
Yeah.
And it's not clean.
No,
It
it's
is not a clean situation on either side. And now but fundamentally, you're right, we have the choice.
Yeah.
As humanity, we have the choice to stand up and say, this is not how we want things to be anymore. We don't want horrific wars like this. We don't want tragedy like this.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the Ukraine and Russia conflict,
which you don't hear much about Ukraine anymore.
Amazingly, somehow you don't hear anything about Ukraine anymore. Very interesting. But how, I think the death toll for them is in the hundreds of thousands.
Well, here's the interesting thing, and I'm sure you guys tell me what you think. You know, when we saw the first images of Israel bombing Gaza, you saw the images right away, right?
Yeah.
Now, when was the last time you saw the first images in Ukraine about that? They didn't show them.
They didn't. And there was actually a really interesting thing that I saw about some of the first images that came out of Ukraine, is that they were faked. So there was the lady, you remember the lady, and she had the medical stuff or whatever. And apparently somebody did a deep dive and found out that so they weren't even actually real images. Which I'm sure there were bad real images. I don't know why they needed to use fake ones.
But the point for this is that the idea of to push the narrative, and this has always been the case when it comes down to the Arab-Israeli conflict. I had a conversation one day with the former ambassador, Dennis Ross.
Yeah.
You guys can Google him up, and he was the one in charge of representing the U.S. side in the argument about the Arab-Israeli. And he attended the Oslo Accord in 2003. So I'm familiar with them because I wrote about the stuff. And so when I met him personally, it was a private event. And I asked him, point blank, why no deal has been reached during? Well, it's because the Palestinian side didn't see it. And I said, yeah, but to what degree?
Yeah.
He said, well, it's the idea the Palestinians never saw the land for security. But I said, well, the issue is much bigger than that. Yeah. How come you didn't mention about the settlements also that have been growing, which was against resolutions from the UN? Well, he said, yeah, but the idea of Israelis were given the Palestinians that opportunity. And I'm not denying it wasn't. It was to a degree. But at that time, Yasser Arafat was looking at it differently.
Yeah.
Why? Because Yasser Arafat was receiving aid, donations from around the Arab and Muslim world.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not pointing finger at Yasser Arafat at the time, but a deal could have been reached. Won't you at least think in terms of the welfare of your people from safety and security? Yeah, land for security. Of course, the arguments in the Arab world always been that's the land. I understand that argument, and I'm not in place to judge here because it will be hard for me. I don't live there. But it was also the arguments to what Arafat was thinking in terms of Yasser Arafat, the late. Because what convinced me about this is what I found out later on, that right after his death, by about 26 hours, it was a transfer of $10 million from a Swiss bank to a bank in France, in Paris. Why Paris, you may ask? Because that's where Yasser Arafat's wife was living. She used to live in Paris. So it's no different than what we're seeing now with the wife of the comedian President Zelensky.
Yeah, she enjoys her Paris shopping sprees, apparently.
$1 million in Cartier. Where that $1 million came from? So
it came from U.S. taxpayers.
Exactly.
Or borrowed from China. It's one of those two places.
And my point in this, just to highlight to you, sometimes you have to take a step back and think of the big picture.
Right.
Now, Yasser Arafat back then might have had different calculations. Maybe not. I wasn't there. I wasn't advising the guy. I didn't. But to me, the optics of it didn't look good.
Yeah.
Well, here you are fighting for the so-called, and your wife living in Paris. I got an issue with that personally.
Right.
That doesn't mean we're going to have to remove the the unequivocal and balanced role of the United States into this.
Yeah.
US was not an honest broker. And this is why, and funny, and I found out that now a video that was released when Chinese President Xi in 2021 made a statement about Israel. That video is not there anymore.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact,
I did watch that be scrubbed.
Yeah, it was scrapped.
Yeah.
Because he argued for the independence.
Yeah.
He didn't favor one over another. This is one thing we are very concerned about. We are concerned about how come Chinese were able to broker a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Well, and so interestingly enough, during this conflict, one of the things that has, as this is unfolded, one of the things that sort of come up is that the US is now there's a question about whether that will be the case or not, to basically broker a deal between the Saudis and Israel. And now they're like, well, I don't know if that'll happen. I don't know whether that'll happen or not. But it's interesting that that's something that came up, that the US was trying to be this broker, this deal broker, basically between the two.
Well, there is, first of all, you guys need to understand the background of really what just happened with this.
Yeah.
There are other events that took place. I don't know if you guys watched the live stream we did on Rumble.
Oh, yeah. Guys,
because we can't talk too much here. Speaking of not talking too much here, believe it or not, Twitter, just X, just took down massive amount of accounts that belongs to the other side in Palestine.
Yeah.
Why? You know why?
They got a lot of pressure.
Well, from whom? It was ordered by the EU, European Union, threatened to sanction them.
Yeah.
So to me, I'll say, well, where is Elon Musk standing on? This is why I said last time.
Right.
I think the guy is a fraud. Elon Musk, if you're hearing this, I'm saying it straightforward, man to man.
Yeah.
You're a fraud.
Well, he more or less caved under the same pressure. Right.
Look what Rumble did when the member of the UK Parliament sent them a letter
about
Russell Brand, and look what the response was.
Right.
See, to me, that's you take stand when it matters.
Right.
If the whole world is in peace, which is great and all that stuff, but in matter of contentions, that's when you find out about a person's character.
That's when it actually matters.
Like they always say, there's the saying, watch what a man does, not what he says.
Yeah.
Same thing.
I agree.
So to me, when Twitter now all of a sudden, or X, find out that, they cave in on this, why should I trust them? Yes, I have an account. I have a lot of followers there.
Yeah.
By the way, if you guys just check it out and you can follow me there. And I do post on it.
Well, let's see if I can put that
I never had an issue with it. But to me, because this matter of the Arab-Israeli conflict is survival for both parties. So all of a sudden, X is taking the stuff down. Well, if you take the other one as well.
Right. I actually absolutely agree with that. If you're going to take it down, take down both sides.
This way,
not just one side. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So to fall back to your point about Saudis, let me just share with you, there are 3 scenarios that a lot of people do not know in the background what took place. One of them has to do with the visit by none other than the former head of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin. He went to Egypt a month and a half before his death. That's one. Second one, the group in Palestine went to Saudi Arabia, visit in the summer. During the same time, the Saudis informed their citizen to get out of Lebanon.
Yeah.
So 3 events that took place in the summer before all this happens. And the big one of them all is that Egypt was informed of what might be happening. And they did inform the Israelis. So the question becomes, did Israel knew about it and let it happen?
Yeah.
That's one, which will be similar to for us with 9/11.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, 9/11, we knew the chatters a month and a half earlier.
And that's not that's a very known situation.
Yeah.
It was known immediately after 9/11 that two intelligence agencies actually had rumblings, had heard the chatter that it was going to happen, and the argument that was given at the time was, well, we couldn't talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so just nobody did anything about it. And then, oops.
Yeah. So then the second argument to this will have to do now with, if you are to think about it from a tactical perspective, this is not your average an operation that is, you have to train for this for months. You have to rehearse it for months. I'll give just an example without going into details. For example, the raid on Osama bin Laden back in Abbottabad. If you only know how many months the training will have to be for that,
right,
and the rehearsal of it, because an op like this will have to be flawless. You cannot afford a minor mistake. And even with the one in Abbottabad to take out Osama bin Laden back then, we had a little hiccup and we end up blowing up the helicopter. But so for something like what just took place in the border in Israel, there is no way. And that leads us to ask a question. And the question is how that group in Palestine was able to acquire this kind of training.
That is the question.
Yeah. Either they have left the country, Palestine, and went over to some foreign country to train.
Right.
And by the way, did I mention that group went to Russia in the summertime? Yeah.
And Prigozhin was in the area
in Egypt. Yeah. Well, because Egypt has the Sinai and also has the crossing border between.
Right. I mean, that's right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the second one has to do with or the foreign entities who train end up going inside the Gaza and training.
And where did they come from?
And usually you have two countries in the Middle East. That's knowing what I know. Two countries in the Middle East that deal with private groups. You got Saudi Arabia and you got United Arab Emirates. They're all there with RSS in Sudan. They all this with Blackwater in the US. They all this with other groups in the Middle East. So, because the nature, the tactical side of this operation, it's very advanced. And if it is the case, hypothetically, the Israeli intelligence didn't know, which I don't buy that argument.
That's a rough argument.
There is no way, because that means what now? That means the capabilities of the Palestinian group is way up, which reflected on the what's the word I'm looking for? The ineffectiveness of the intelligence. You tell me both the Israeli intelligence and military apparatus. I'm losing my mind here.
It's okay.
Because there's so many things to think about. Didn't know about it.
I have that's one of the things actually I have the hardest time believing, because I think in the beginning the conversation about it was, oh well, the Mossad basically said, oh well, we heard the chatter but we didn't think it was credible. They are, by pretty much all accounts, the number one intelligence agency in the world. I mean, they're phenomenally good, phenomenally trained.
They are, and we used to have some entities inside Washington training with them. So, but then there is another element to all this. Hypothetically, if we say all this is maybe might have been the case, then you get the elements, the technical aspects. Technology. If you only know about that border, how it is surveilled by cameras from every angle you can imagine. You have the cameras and you have the signals from the satellites. So to bring it back to the tactical, there is one aspect that if this was indeed a successful operation that they didn't know about, that means the Palestinian group was able to jam the communication. And if you jam communications for Israel, which has one of the most developed stuff that we send them, that's bad news. So this will be also considered as a technical failure.
Well, and then who taught them how to do that? right? So
Yeah,
the
that's part
big
of that training.
right, the big questions that you're asking are how actually physiologically how did this happen?
Yeah, and this is why, of course, there are those who argue the other side of the argument that uh, most inside Israel, they don't like the prime minister,
Mhm.
and he's not well liked, by the way.
Yeah.
Given the not only the corruption, which is normal for that government and ours, for
Oh
that
yeah,
matter,
most governments are in that same
there's
boat.
nothing new there. But for the fact that, to me, the big concern was for the fact that the U.S. rushed into sending $4 billion,
Yeah.
sending the largest aircraft carrier, which I have a picture of it
Yeah.
here. I'm going to share it with you guys.
Well, and
But
there's
we have sent
another aircraft carrier in that
Right.
headed towards that region.
this one.
Let's see. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
This is Gerald for the
huge.
largest. We even send in our F-35. Well, the F-35.
Yeah.
Israel has it. Of course, the only country that gets stuff like that. The big concern with this, sending this aircraft carrier, is triggering another big problem. Can anybody type in the chat box, what do you think that problem is?
Mhm.
There is another problem. We don't want to. I want to see your answer. Just to, there's a much bigger problem for now the US send-in. So if you can type it on the chat box, and I'll take a look at it later on because it takes a while to show up.
Yeah.
So and why am I mentioning this? Because now you have to think about the Arab-Israeli conflict from a geopolitical aspect.
Absolutely.
Oil prices is already going up.
Yeah.
Stock markets are already going down. Anything in the Middle East tends to impact the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Why Middle East? Because it's the hub for energy.
Yeah.
So
it really is. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a hub for energy, oil and gas.
Yeah, well, you look at just two events. Again, like I always say, nothing happens in a vacuum.
Mhm.
Two events that took place just within a week. One of them is Qatar
Yeah.
signed 2 deals with France to deliver liquefied natural gas for 27 years.
Yeah.
That's one. And second one, Iraq government passed a law that is now going to stop the US dollar from circulation and from trading.
Yeah. Iraq of all places.
Yeah. Well, why? Why? Because Iraq is an OPEC member.
Yeah.
But what did Iraq saw just happened a few months ago with BRICS summit?
Mhm.
You all know what happened.
Yeah.
3 countries in the Middle East,
Yeah.
Iran, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, joined BRICS. We're invited, of course, for next year. So what do they have in common?
Oil
Producers. So Iraq is thinking in terms of, we don't want to miss the boat.
Yeah.
So that's the way I see it. And all this happens because sometimes, and here is, I'm going to say it, this might shock you,
Mhm.
but peace in Middle East is not good for Israel, because Israel, for us, is
Yeah.
our eyes and ears in
Yeah.
the region. That's why we always wanted to maintain the military capability of Israel above any other.
Yeah.
But now we are having a hard time doing that because Iran is developing its missile technology. It's that's why you hear this rhetoric about, well, they're gonna attack Iran. They can't.
Yeah.
Israel cannot attack Iran. US cannot attack Iran
Mhm.
because we know what the consequences will be.
Yeah.
Iran is not a small, I wrote a book about it. I did the research for 2 years, including their military capabilities and intelligence apparatus. Iran intelligence service is very wired in the Middle East.
Yeah.
There are those who saying, well, they supported the group from Palestine too. Even our Secretary of State said no, Iran didn't involve.
Yeah.
But he later had to delete.
He did delete it later.
Yeah. So you know why? Because the establishment didn't want that.
Yeah.
This is why I'm saying what the media can push the narrative one way or another.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we wanted to tackle this topic usually. And of course we will, because we're not going to shy away from just because it's controversial. Right. We have a responsibility towards our viewers, towards you. We bring you the facts, but you decide yourself. So it's very complicated.
It's very, very complicated.
But the big issue now that we are very concerned about, we, the United States, is that we see in, for example, how China succeeded in bringing Iran and Saudi Arabia together, which will change the dynamics of the Middle East. As a matter of fact, today, if I'm not mistaken, it would be the first call between the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, and Crown Prince MBS.
Wow.
Yeah, it's today. I just saw it this morning on my way here.
Yeah.
So, which is, whoever thought, because we always wanted to maintain that line of division.
Yeah.
Because that's how we maintain our presence. But the geopolitical landscape is shifting.
It is.
It's shifting, whether we like it or not. And this Arab-Israeli, that's why all of a sudden it pops up. What makes you think that all of a sudden you don't hear much about Ukraine anymore?
You don't hear anything about Ukraine anymore.
That's it. It's because also, as an analyst, I would look at it that, well, maybe the US is coming to grip with the reality that it's been a failure all along.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. And you know, the shocker of all this, which I will be talking about tomorrow, by the way, guys, on, let me just share the link with them for, I'm going to be talking about this one tomorrow, about Chuck Schumer's trip to China recently.
Yeah.
You know what he did? He had to criticize China for not standing with Israel.
Yeah.
You know, to me, it's very humiliating. It's humiliating not only to Chuck Schumer himself, but to our country. Who are we to go and dictate to a country what to say and not to say?
That's rough. That's a rough choice.
It is.
Right? That's a very
I don't know who
choice.
was advising him. I don't know who was advising, you know, beside Chuck Schumer being a Jew of Ukraine background, by the way. A lot of people do not know. His ancestors are Ukrainian
I didn't
Jew.
know that either.
A lot of people do not know, but he's but beside the point, I don't, you know, if I'm sure he has an advisor or advisors for that matter.
Right.
And this is what boggled the mind is an advisor couldn't step forward and tell him, sir, this will not go well.
Yeah. And it didn't go
well.
well.
The Chinese will give you the proper respect, not out of fear or weakness, but out of how their culture is.
Yeah.
But that's not a good way of doing it. The optics of it will not look good. And here we are.
Yeah.
You know, you go there and you tell them, well, we condemn the Chinese for not standing with Israel. But Chinese don't care for getting into, for example, we got to support this versus this. That's how this succeeded in brokering a deal between two arch enemies.
Right.
If you only know the history between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that traces back some 1,400 years. China was able to broker a deal. And you know why? Because this China stayed neutral.
Yeah.
It didn't favor one religion over another. It didn't favor one ethnic group over another. It didn't favor one country over another.
Yeah.
What he went after is to ensure stability and peace because everybody will benefit.
Yeah.
This is where there are a lot of voices now saying, well, maybe Chinese needs to step into the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Well, they're proven in it. And obviously China does not do everything right, but there is an impartiality that I think would serve this situation very well, because each side has a grievance and each side has legitimate grievance.
Well, that's why that video was taken down, because President Xi back in 2021 argued for the neutrality. So in other words, if you are to say the Israelis have a right to exist, which is true,
absolutely,
so do the Palestinians.
Right.
You know, it's just a matter of working out. I remember when I was doing my graduate program. If I don't know, should we share the story?
Yes, please.
I'll share with you a story, guys. Not a story; it's a reality. What happened when I was doing my graduate program in international security. We had to do, you know, you take global affairs and you take one issue, contentious issue, and you play a role. You do role play on it.
Yeah.
So we did the Arab-Israeli conflict because it's an eternal. It's always been. It's not a laughing matter, but so we had the one side, one of within the group in my classmates. One play Israel, one play the US, one play the EU, and one played, I think, the UN. Even though the UN role was not
minimal. Yeah.
So I played the role of Europe. You know, because I didn't want to play as an American. Well, yeah, I'm an American, but let's look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And when my time or my turn came to suggest how this could be solved, and I thought about, well, at least you start with the basics. And what is the basics? The one I argued back then, and let's still hold that conviction of that. The status of Jerusalem, which is very contentious. This is what led also to other problems when Israel moved embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We were the first to move the embassy over. Other countries said, no, we're not doing that. So what I argued back then was that to make Jerusalem an international city, which means what?
Yeah.
You take turns. 1 year will be under the control of Israel.
Yeah.
The next year will be under the control of Palestinians, at least for Jerusalem. And why Jerusalem? Because it has also, you got three monotheistic religions.
Right.
Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. They all have a right to that part of the world.
Yeah.
So why not make it at least international? Visitors can go, can visit. Worshippers can go from both sides or all three sides. As a matter of fact, Christians now in Israel are being harassed. I've saw an image of Jewish kids spitting on the cross.
Yeah.
You know, it's not right.
Yeah.
Whether you are a religious person or not, it's just not right.
Yeah.
You don't do that. So that was my argument. And I compared that to the Vatican. Make it like the Vatican.
Yeah.
It's an international city, you know, doesn't fall under the Italian government. So,
well, but that requires a level of cooperation and
compromise
and compromise. Yeah. And I think that that's something that has been, you know, everybody's like, oh, this is mine. This is mine. Yeah. This is mine. This is mine. The problem with this is mine and not yours, and you can't participate in it, is that it leads to absolute catastrophe, right? Yeah. So people fighting over who's right, that's what we've got here in this situation, is people who are fighting over what's right. And there's a sense that you have to fight, right, instead of compromise, that somehow conflict and success and conquest are more important than peace and cooperation. And that, I think, is fundamentally something that needs to change in humanity if we are going to survive. Because if we're looking at it all, you know, we live in a nuclear age. We live in an age where, you know, one poorly, whatever you want to call it, placed nuke, and we're done as a species and as a planet. And so we're not looking at it like we're fighting with sticks and stones here. We're fighting with some very severe things.
And the consequences won't be pretty.
They will not be pretty. And so humanity, more or less, doesn't have a choice: either eradication or figure out how to put your neighbor above all of the rest of it, how to actually care about the human being next to you, regardless of what they believe, regardless of what they think, regardless of how wrong you may think they are. And if you think it's not possible to do that, look at families. Yeah. How often does every single person in a family believe the same thing? Never. No. And you fight with your family, but at the end of the day, you love them and you have their back. And if you don't have a great family, you can do that with your friends. You don't agree with your friends on everything.
That's true.
But in the end, you have their back.
Let me go back to the point of why the concern about the U.S. aircraft group is in the region.
Yeah.
And this one has to do with Russia, because the concern has to do with the Black Sea. And of course, Iran is to a degree, but Iran already took care of that by putting mine underwater in the Strait of Hormuz. So we know what the consequences will be. And don't ever think that Iran will hesitate. If this is why both Israel and the U.S. couldn't attack. I remember when I had a conversation with Scott Ritter, he argued, I couldn't agree more with what he said, that indeed, and I reached that conclusion way back when I was doing the research for the book, that the Iran's capability will be a big challenge because we do have a lot of interests in the Middle East.
Yeah.
This is no
different. A lot of interests, geez.
Well, what I'm referring to is the bases.
Yeah.
So
say more about that.
Well, it's about our military presence.
Yeah.
We had a base.
Lot,
We had bases, and we had military U.S. troops on Saudi soil. We had in Bahrain with the Fifth Fleet. We had presence in Jordan. We had presence in Egypt. We do have presence in that. So, and all that is within reach of those missiles that Iran developed. It's no different than when you go far east to South China Sea, or China for that matter. China has missiles within reach to Guam, for example, which we have a major presence. This is why I don't understand, and not to shift the topic here, but I don't understand why, for example, countries like Philippines all of a sudden taking a pivot 360 degree and saying to the US, yeah, bring it on. They don't understand that they are within reach of Chinese missile.
Yeah.
No different than South Korea and Japan. Of course, it's not gonna, I hope it will never get to that.
Oh, I hope not too.
But why those countries will put themselves in that position to begin with?
Because we have short-sighted politicians. Straight, that is my opinion. Our politicians overall, there are, of course, there are some good ones, but for the most part, politicians are short-sighted. And you know, everyone says, oh no, it's not true. It's not true. Look at history.
No, it is.
Look at history. All you have to do is take a look at history and see how short-sighted so many politicians were.
Well, because politicians nowadays are amateurs. They're not, it's not about, and again, this is not about, you can have, it's common sense. And that's what we're lacking in politics. There are those who say, well, there is no such common sense in politics. I see your point, because it's all about strategic interests. But also, I see also the argument about having strategic vision in thinking, okay, my decision today, how that's going to impact the course of history 15 years, 20 years from today. And we don't think in those terms because we think about the next quarter, the next cycle,
the next election. The next election. You're absolutely right.
This is why, sorry to interrupt, when I'm thinking about it, this is why I believe Chuck Schumer said what he said about China, is because his message is meant to be for domestic consumption, given the upcoming US presidential elections. And a lot of people are saying that Democrats will lose if that's usually why I see. So it's all about the strategic vision that we lack. And like I always say, when we didn't have, I mean, for the last 4 decades after the 50s or even 60s, we start to see this major shift in American foreign policy with no strategy. There was no strategy at all.
Well, and now we're reaping the consequences of that.
Well, this one is
the world is reaping the consequences of that, quite frankly.
This is now an example, or what's the word? Not an example, but an outcome, one among others, of the Arab-Israeli conflict now. This coming to the surface. But there are always been, and I'm not naive, I've been around long enough to know, these things don't happen just on their own. No, there's always something else.
Well, and that's kind of the thing, right? So when we're looking at this, it's so awful and so gruesome and so terrible. And also what's going on underneath, asking the hard questions of how did this actually happen? Why did this actually happen? So that we can prevent it from happening again.
And this is what I see, just to touch it on the human side. It's because this concept of live and let live couldn't be more applicable in the case of and I can only imagine on both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, especially the civilians. I can only imagine the amount of grief that they're going to have. And you're going to be talking about this one soon, right? Why don't you show that link?
Oh, sure.
You guys, by the way, Elizabeth is going to be talking about this aspect of
let me see if I've got it. So Ross, if you guys remember, Ross and I on my channel, I'm going to post it right now in the chat. In about half an hour, are going to do a show on how to deal with grief, because whether you have family or friends that are on either side, or even if you're just so blown away by what happened and the severity of it. Grief is something that we culturally do not deal with very well. Most cultures don't deal with it very well. You're told to stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down. The problem is you cannot stuff it down forever. It always comes back up. And so, Ross and I wanted to do a show on, basically giving you some ways to deal with grief. Not that it makes grief just magically go away, but that it lets you have freedom from it. So there's the link. If you guys want to join that, it's a live stream that Ross and I are doing. And
also make sure to sign up for the free ebook.
Yes.
Because I do have a section there about the Arab-Israeli conflict. You'll have a better understanding, and it's free there. You just sign up for it. And by the way, we did mention we do not, and I mean it, we do not give your email away to
we don't give your email. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You can have my word on that one. So
anyway, let's take some questions.
Yeah, let's see, because you have to prepare for your other show. So.
Let's take maybe 1 or 2 questions, guys. I know there's a lag, so we're going to talk for a second, and then once the questions start coming in, I'll take a look.
So the bottom line is, the way I see it is that this now opened up a really, I know it's a deep wound and all that. Sometimes some good could come out of bad situations, as bad as it was. I saw the images, and it's nothing stands, but I really hope there will be.
Well, but here's the thing. We're the ones who get to decide that, right? So this is such a horrific situation.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's going to be any natural good that comes out of it, but there is a possibility for people really to stand up and say, we are done.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough with these wars, because we saw a little bit through about the Ukraine and Russia casualties, but we honestly really didn't see very much.
No, the media didn't want to show.
No.
This is also the media takes blame into all this, because this is the one pushing the narrative one direction or another. I mean, for now, Twitter to remove all those accounts just because they disagree,
I cannot.
Yeah, and again, shame on Elon Musk for not, he owns it, right? Shame, you couldn't take stand when it matters.
Yeah.
To me, that's
no, I agree.
I
agree.
That's completely. To me, no matter what you say, no matter how smart you are,
it
is when it matters, you couldn't take stand. To me, that's the optimal weakness when it comes down to characters. Take it and stand like a man.
No, I agree completely.
But it's his Twitter, so he can decide whatever. So
well, but it's just that's really the thing. So you've been to war. My future husband, guys, I'm getting married in 24 days.
Yeah.
Very exciting. I'm very, very happy. But my future husband is also a veteran.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've watched people who have been in combat, who have been in actual conflict situations. War is not what you see on TV. War is not what you read in the papers. The horrors of it are this. This is the legitimate horrors of war. It's not the beautiful honor thing that you see, and media in its own right, if it was being honest, would show what it's really like, would show what you guys actually saw.
Well, this is the reason why you didn't see the images in Ukraine, because the narrative was Ukraine is winning the war, when in reality it wasn't.
Right. And now they had to admit it. I mean, everybody's admitted at this point.
This month,
right?
And media wasn't showing the image. And look, the moment the conflict erupted between Israel and Palestine, all of a sudden the images were there. So,
all right, I can't see any questions, guys.
Okay.
Well, all right. Well, let me see. Let me scroll really quickly and see if I can see a question. Guys, we're going to start taking questions again.
Yeah,
I know that we talk so much that we typically run over.
It's because we were hoping that there will be, and please, if this is your first time, make sure to subscribe. We will greatly appreciate it.
I cannot see anything that says question on it.
Yeah. So anyway, next time, we'll mention it at the beginning. We will be taking questions, so you can prepare your questions, and there is this delay
there is a delay. But guys, last thing, if you want to join Ross and I for the conversation on grief and how to deal with grief, it's in 30 minutes on my channel. If you guys don't know, I have a channel.
Yeah.
It's this. I'm posting the link in the chat again. But yeah, join us and let's see what we can do for humanity.
All
Even
right.
if it's just a little bit, it's something.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, I hope you find this very informative, and we look forward to seeing you next time. As always, prepare yourself for changing the world order. Till next time. Bye-bye.